board. So we're doing that first. And what is better than to start a session with a test? So we're going to have a test. Nope, don't anybody leave, because it's not really a test. It's just a poll. So I'm going to pull up the poll for today and ask you, how well do you know universal design for learning? We'll give you just a minute to run through that. All right, this is fun. It looks like we've got people all over the board. So that gives us a nice fun group. I'm going to give you 3 more seconds to vote or to answer the poll. Complete the test. We'll call it that. All right. So let's share the results. Looks like we have quite a few people that's not at all. About double that is somewhat. A group of you had a training or two, and we've got 2 people that could write a book. So marvelous. Feel free to join in and share something as you want to join and add anything to what we have to say. All right, as Amy said, we are both UDL junkies, nerds, whatever you want to call us. We can't get enough of it. But these are our goals for our session today with you. In our next hour, we want to give you an overview, and we would love to talk about this more with you, but for in the hour, we're just going to give you an overview. That's why we called it 101. We're also going to explore the concept and implications of variability. What does that mean? And we want to make sure that you are amazed, that you explore the application of UDL in your classroom or even in your everyday life, because we'll talk about some applications for everyday living. We want you to be amazed by how you engage with UDL every day. Because here's the thing, everybody has some prior knowledge. So we're going to kind of point that out, what your prior knowledge is, and build upon that. And we want you to gasp, laugh, and nod your head. And not gasp for air, but just like, oh yeah, that's right. And we hope that you tilt your head a little bit and say, okay, I hadn't thought about it that way, but it gives me something new to think about. Because as lifelong learners, we're looking for new information every day. So Amy, give us a definition of UDL.
Thank you, Sarah. So before we get started, I do want to name a couple things that we put in the chat there. So you have the session handouts are posted in there, copy the PowerPoint slides. You also have, the resources. So there you go there. And in addition to that, if you're looking, again, we want to make sure your name is correct. So with that, I want to talk about where universal design comes from. So universal design is not new, but what happened in the last reauthorizations of both the Higher Education Act and the Perkins legislation, we defined it and we put it into law. So that's very exciting. The term universal design for learning means a scientific framework, scientifically valid framework for guiding educational practices. It provides flexibility in the ways information is presented, in the ways students respond or demonstrate knowledge and skills, and in the way students are engaged. So we're looking at all those ways in which students are really represented within your classroom. In addition to that, universal design reduces barriers in instruction, provides appropriate accommodations, supports and challenges, and maintains high achievement expectations for all students. One of the things that's important to think about when we think about universal design is it's great for individuals with disabilities that are in our classrooms, but at the same time, it is really phenomenal for individuals who are in our classroom just in general. Any old student is going to get a great enhancement through universal design. So as we come in today, Sarah, I got to double check here. As we come in today, just wanted to ask a couple, sorry, I had somebody in the, I want to make sure everybody gets in. As we come in today, I want to talk about how we're really looking at universal design. One of the things that we're doing is our learning environment. You're able, through a virtual conference, you're able to sit anywhere you want, you're able to stand, you're able to walk around. I actually think Sarah is standing and I'm sitting, so see, didn't even know. You can eat, have a drink, enjoy a donut. That's one of the beautiful things about virtual conferences. You're not going to interrupt anybody if you're sitting there eating a bag of chips. You can fidget, you can tap your foot, you can wiggle around in your chair. Those are all ways to self-regulate your system. Ways that we're going to engage with you. You're able to raise that virtual hand, or if your camera's on, your real hand. And then you're also able to post in the chat box. So we'd love to hear from you through the chat. And then if you're one of those people who, like me, if I'm listening to a session and there's really great stuff, I jot it down. I have my notepad right here. Well, you can't see it because of the thing, but I have my notepad there, and you jot that stuff down, and then you can doodle. You can do any of those things while you're listening to us. A couple things that we're doing for you. We're going to be sharing our screen. In addition to that, you're getting a personal copy of the slides, and our closed captioning is on. So if you're an instructor and you're thinking, what can I do for universal design? Those are all things that you can do for universal design to implement that into your classroom. Share your screen slides. Be able to turn on closed caption. And one of the really fun and important things is have your camera on if you're presenting. If you're sitting there in your recliner today and you're home and you're like, Amy, it's Friday. I've got my coffee, my donut, and I'm in the recliner. Fantastic, because the rocking will really kind of mess with me presenting to you. So you don't have to have your camera on for that. But if you're presenting to your class, turn that camera on so they can see your faces, because it really does enhance the engagement. So when we talk about universal design, we really have talked about 3 different ways in which we see it: architecture, neuroscience, and learning. And we are really familiar with, and if you're thinking, no, I'm not, but you probably are. You're very familiar with seeing universal design concepts in architecture. In neuroscience is really where we see universal design come about. How do we look at variability? How do we embed what we're doing in reacting to how humans learn and react? And then where do we see it in learning? So we're going to cover all these all these 3 concepts today. We're going to talk about the engagement in practices and engagement of optimizing relevance, value, and authenticity, but also how it is a sustained effort, and persistence is really key in the implementation of universal design. So this is a fantastic video, not to oversell, but fantastic video that we're going to lead with. And this really talks about the myth of average. So it's an Air Force analogy, and we're going to talk about what jagged profiles for learning are and how universal design is applicable to things throughout your world, but also through things within education. So with that, Sarah, take it away.
So let's say you have to read an incredibly long email from your boss that you have to finish before the big...
It's 1952, and the Air Force has a problem. They've got good pilots flying better planes, but they're getting worse results, and they don't know why. And for a while, they blamed the pilots. They even blamed the technology. And they eventually got around to blaming the flight instructors. But it turned out that the problem was actually with the cockpit. Let me explain. Imagine you're a fighter pilot. You're operating a machine that in some cases can travel faster than the speed of sound, and where issues between success and failure, sometimes life and death, can be measured in split seconds. If you're a fighter pilot, you know that your performance depends fundamentally on the fit between you and your cockpit. Because after all, what good is the best technology in the world if you can't reach the critical instruments when you need them the most? But this presents a challenge for the Air Force, because obviously pilots are not the same size. So the issue is, how do you design one cockpit that can fit the most individuals? For a long time, it was assumed that you could do this by designing for the average pilot. That almost seems intuitively right. If you design something that fit for the average size person, wouldn't it fit most people? It seems right, but it's actually wrong. And 60 years ago, an Air Force researcher, Gilbert Daniels, proved to the world just how wrong this really is and what it was costing us. Here's how he did it. He studied over 4,000 pilots, and he measured them on 10 dimensions of size. And he asked a very simple question. How many of these pilots are average on all 10 dimensions? The assumption was that most of them would be. Do you know how many really were? 0. Gilbert Daniels proved there was no such thing as an average pilot. Instead, what he found was that every single pilot had what we call a jagged size profile, right? It means you're not, no one's at the same on every dimension. And this makes sense. Just because you're the tallest person doesn't mean you're the heaviest. It doesn't mean you have the broadest shoulders or the longest torso. But this is tricky because if every pilot has a jagged size profile and you design a cockpit on average, you've literally designed it for nobody. So the Air Force realized they had a problem, and their response was bold. They banned the average, meaning that moving forward, they refused to buy fighter jets where the cockpit was designed for an average-sized pilot. And instead, they demanded that the companies who built these planes design them to the edges of dimensions of size, meaning that rather than design for, say, the average height, they wanted a cockpit that could accommodate as close to the shortest pilot and the tallest pilot as the technology would allow. Now, the companies that made these planes, as you could imagine, weren't happy, right? They argued and lobbied, and they said it's going to be impossible, or at least impossibly expensive, to build a flexible cockpit. But once they realized that the Air Force wasn't going to budge, suddenly it was possible. And it turned out it wasn't that expensive. And in fact, they made great strides, leveraging simple solutions that we all take for granted in our everyday lives, like adjustable seats. And as a result, the Air Force not only improved the performance of the pilots that they already had, but they dramatically expanded their talent pool. And today, we have the most diverse pool of fighter pilots ever. But here's the thing. Many of our top pilots would have never fit in a cockpit designed on average. So, most of us have never sat in the cockpit of a $150 million fighter jet, right? But we've all sat in the classroom. And I would argue I would argue that these are the cockpits of our economy. And I think we all know that we have some problems. We're spending more money than ever before, but we're getting worse results. Whether we're talking about declining test scores in math and science, or our dropout crisis. You probably know that we have over 1.2 million dropouts every single year in high school in this country. What you may not know is that at least 4% of those dropouts are known to be intellectually gifted. That means we're losing over 50,000 of our brightest minds every single year. So we know we have a problem, but do we know why? So far, we've been content to blame the students. We blame the teachers. We even blame the parents. But here's the thing. I think back to the Air Force example, and I can't help but wonder how much of this problem is just bad design. Here's what I mean. Even though we have one of the most diverse countries in the history of the world, and even though it's the 21st century, we still design our learning environments like textbooks for the average student. No kidding. We call it age appropriate, and we think it's good enough. But of course it's not. I mean, think about it. What does it even mean to design for an average student? Because a student is not one-dimensional, like struggling to gifted. Students vary on many dimensions of learning, just like they vary on dimensions of size. Here are a few obvious ones. And just like size, each student, every single one of them, has a jagged learning profile. Meaning they have strengths, they're average at some things, and they have weaknesses. We all do. Even geniuses have weaknesses. But if the fighter pilot example has taught us anything, it's this. If you design those learning environments on average, odds are you've designed them for nobody.
I think that's a great place to stop.
So no wonder.
If you want to see that entire TED Talk, which is really fantastic, I really encourage you to please check that out. We are posting some resources. Sorry, my lights keep going off in my office. We are posting some resources in the chat, so be sure to check those out. And then I kind of just want to see a show of hands. What did you think of that? Did we like that? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Seeing some thumbs up there. I think it talks a lot about, and it did a really great job of talking about universal design and how that looks. And how many of you thought that you saw universal design as you came into your home or your office today? Think of all the places that you run into universal design. As you walk into a market or a Target, as you're getting into your car and you're adjusting your seatbelt, those are all aspects of universal design. One of the things that when we look at universal design as it applies to education is where are the barriers and how to address the barriers. And one of the things that's really important with that jagged learning profile is that idea of variability and also addressing the barriers in the environment, not within the student. And I'm going to hand that off to Sarah to talk us through a little bit more about that.
You know, and Amy just spoke those words, but they're very powerful. So I'm going to let it sink in for a minute. The barrier is in the environment, not the learner. Let me give you a practical application. How many of you raise your hand, leap to your feet so you don't get sleepy, whatever you need to do, remember a time before technology being in our everyday lives? Okay, not everybody. I know some of you, it's always been there. For me, I remember a time when technology wasn't. So here's my follow-up question. Thanks, Libby. Thanks for raising your hand. You're with me there. When something goes wrong with your technology, who do you think is at fault? Usually I think it's me. I'm like, oh, I must have been doing something wrong. But oftentimes the barrier's in the environment, not in the learner, not always. Sometimes it is user error. But I think if we can think about that, that's a practical application, okay? Even if you grew up at a time of technology, maybe you think that it's the barriers in you. So think about that with our adult education CTE students. Many of them have not had a lot of success in school. For many of them, that's why they're here with us. And so do you think they think the barriers in the environment? No, they think it's in them. But think about how different it would be if we could design our classrooms to look at the environment first and help our learners to be advocating for themselves and thinking about UDL, because part of UDL is making sure that our adult learners understand what it is and they can interact with it also, because then that's a whole different mind shift for them, which is what else is on this slide. UDL isn't a checklist of things to do. It's a lens for us to think about everything that we do, So let's do another little kind of practical application to drive this point home. And I love to use this one, especially with people who don't necessarily have never heard of UDL before and understanding variability. So one of the things that you may or may not know about me, I've known this for a long time, I've known some of you for a long time, is that I love to cook. So I would love for Amy and all the rest of you to come on down to Edwardsville this evening and have dinner, okay? So if I'm serving what's on the slide, how many are you in? Are you good with that lasagna? It's kind of Mexican lasagna. Amy, are you coming?
I'm definitely coming, Sarah, because I'd love to hang out with you. And I think our timing for this is perfect because that does look really good because we're right before lunch with our session today. But I have a little bit of an issue with cheese. So I'll be pulling off that whole top layer. I love cheese. It doesn't love me. and so I'll have a little issue with that. But I'm also seeing quite a bit of ground beef in there, and I'm surprised that you have ground beef in there because you're a vegetarian.
Yeah, so Carrie looks like she needs gluten-free. Amy can't have the cheese. And Kathy says she's eager to come but hesitant to eat. And we've got somebody who's lactose intolerant. And Amy's correct. I am a vegetarian. And so I do sometimes cook with meat to make my guests happy, but I don't eat it myself. So it would be kind of a bummer to make something that I couldn't eat. So in this dinner party analogy, you guys have already brought up all of the points that we have on there. And the point is that we all are variable, that we all have different likes, dislikes, needs. We might be allergic to something. So it would be a bummer because I want to be a good host. It's like we all want to be good teachers for our students. So it would be a bummer to have so many people not be able to participate. So what about if we did a little bit of different menu design? What if I served here, what you see on the slide now? How do you feel? Anybody want to rethink? Amanda, you're going to eat everything. Polly says too many carbs. Yeah. Okay. So now what about this, folks? Everybody who said they didn't like the corn, they can't eat the cheese, they're lactose intolerant, they're all those things. What can you do? And now are you in? Jump to your feet and say, yep, I'll be there, Sarah.
I was going to say, Lynn has it in the chat there. Everybody can select what works for them.
Exactly.
Totally customizable. Thank you, Patty and Lynn.
Choices. Love that. There's choices. And so then everybody can participate and everybody can be happy and get exactly what they want. So we want to think about designing our classrooms in the same way. But here's the thing. Choice is not the same as variety. Because what if I had this nice variety of menu here? What if you're going to stay with me for a week and you're going to be there Monday through Friday and here are all the choices? I still see a lot of issues with what you all brought up already, right? There's the cheese issue, there's meat for some of you, there's corn. I see corn. I know somebody said no corn. Yeah. So having choice is not, having some variety isn't the same as having choice. We need to make sure that our learners every day get choices and that they understand, what choices work for them and how they can interact with them. And we've got this whole table eating thing going on. So let's carry on with that and think about setting the table for learning. And we're going to make a little shift and think about UDL as it pertains to variability. And Amy and I have one more video. This is our last video for today. We do, though, have a whole series, 6 videos, very short, that explain UDL that you can use with your students, you can use with other teachers, you can use for yourself to inform. So I'm going to bring one up now, and then I'm going to let Amy put in the chat how you can find these videos in the future.
The link's in the chat, but I'll put it in again in case it got lost.
Oh, thanks, Amy. She's so good. She already did it.
Have you ever attended a dinner party where the host prepared tasty and inviting food, attractively displayed it on a large table, pulled up a comfortable chair and invited you to feast, but not provide any silverware to use to eat the meal? By the way, the meal consists of pasta with a very messy sauce. Of course not. Why? Because your host knows simply providing food is not a good host. Tools to eat the food need to be in place to ensure a positive experience. You might be able to consume some of that pasta, but it would not be efficient. It will certainly be messy and not as enjoyable as it could have been. Classrooms are the same. Clearly, educators need well-defined lessons that outline the content. The what we are teaching is the meal we are serving. In addition to the meal, educators need to set the table for learning. The silverware pieces are our learning strategies. Teaching our students how to learn is providing the tools they will need to ingest the information, process it through their individual learning system, and gain value. Remember, we all want to attend that symbolic dinner party only if it is an inviting, positive place and we see how it will fill our needs. For classrooms, this means we need to make sure we provide the why of learning so learners understand how this information will benefit them and they are motivated to be in class and to learn once they are there. As you cook up your next learning lesson, remember to set the table for learning. Your learners will keep coming back for more.
Thanks. All right, you guys, I'm just gonna fess up that I'm having a really serious, there we go, technical difficulties today. One of my screens went down, of course, right before this. So just thanks for bearing with me on there. So that gives you a little bit of idea about setting the table for learning and how UDL can help with that, the why, how, and what, and we're gonna go through that just a little bit. But to further unpack that a little bit more, we want to think about designing for variability, making sure that we provide those choices. And again, some of you put in the chat that, sometimes people are resistant to change. So let's give you one more reason and one more kind of argument to share with people if they're resistant to doing things a different way. So on your screen is Usain Bolt. And for quite some time, he was the fastest human on the planet. I'm not sure if he still is or not. Somebody
got dethroned at the Olympics.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Amy. But still, he's my guy.
Yeah.
And I think he's awesome. And he's super fast. Now, Usain Bolt happens to wear size 13 men's shoes. The average men's shoe size is 8.5. So what if we made Usain Bolt wear size 8.5 shoes? I mean, that would be ridiculous. I'm not sure he could even get his feet in there. If he couldn't maximize his potential. He'd probably have to run barefoot. So when we ask our learners to do everything in the same way or in the old traditional ways, we are missing some of the potential of our learners. They may be able to run really fast, but they can't because we're giving them the wrong size shoes. They might be able to fly a fighter plane, but they can't because they can't reach the pedals because the seat is not adjustable. So we need to make sure that we're providing choices and we're designing for variability. If we're already designing for variability in some things that are not nearly as important as learning, such as shoes, although shoes are important, then I think we can make a case, a good, strong case of why we need to design for variability in our classrooms. Okay, Amy and I have gone through a lot of information in a short period of time. So we want to give you a little bit of time to think about, to pause and reflect. So what resonates so far, if you want to put that in the chat, or if you'd like to, just write it down on a piece of paper, put it on your phone, whatever works for you, but jot down some thoughts for you to consider later. What questions do you have and what might work in your own context, in your own classroom, in your own life? So, okay, Kathy wants to ban the average. Amy, have you been looking at the chat? Do we have any other questions that?
We do have one question here from Michael. He says, when designing in cognitive load theory, by managing cognitive load, a lesson will automatically differentiate. Will UDL accomplish the same? And I'll let you take the first stab and then I'll follow.
Well, one thing, and so we've been talking about differentiating instruction for some time, and that of course is a very powerful educational concept. The little bit of nuance, the difference in UDL is that you make sure that you from the very beginning, you're looking at the lesson having many different variability. So instead of saying, okay, I'm going to teach to this and teach to that, it's from the very beginning, just thinking about how can I have broad strokes, ways to interact with materials. So examples of that might be in a classroom that I'm presenting material, but I'm allowing somebody to go sit over in the corner and have headphones on and look at something and listen to it. And somebody else can actually read it later on at night whenever because they're a night owl. I mean, those kinds of things are universal design for learning. And as far as cognitive load, yeah, I mean, I just kind of mentioned that in one place because I know for me, I'm a morning person, so I am able to take on a lot more information and learn it more effectively if you give me the right time of day. One of the cool things about the technology that we have available now is we can have asynchronous information and have, even if it's in class, maybe there's information they can engage with later on. Do you want to add something to that, Amy?
I think you've covered it, and I really think the chat is resonating with what we want you to walk away with. So that idea of allowing students to engage in learning that shows you what they know and the best learning language is most equitable, and I think that's fantastic. And really looking at, so to answer your question, Michael, yes, universal design is very similar. That's the short answer. Sarah gave you a much broader answer, which is fantastic as well. But the idea of small steps make a big difference, and we're going to talk about that a lot, looking at little changes that you can make, because it's not something that we want you to walk out of this session and say, I have to go rewrite my whole curriculum. What are you talking about, ladies? It's the middle of the semester. I'm already halfway down the road teaching. We're sitting in September. But you can make little changes in the way in which you lay out your instruction, the way in which you engage with your students, which will infuse universal design and really increase your accessibility for all of your students. So that's what we want you to walk away with, and we'll give you some of those tips and tricks. We already have turning on the closed captioning, that word was hard today, and also having your camera on, and then sharing not only your slides ahead of time, but possibly sharing in your syllabus before classes start. So when we're looking at next semester, share those syllabi before the class starts so the students know what's coming. A lot of the idea of universal design is allowing students to have an understanding of expectation, and that should not be something that's new or unique to education. So great comments in the chat.
Hey, Amy, if I could just add to it, in reading those, talking about the why, because you gave a lot of great options of ways to make your classes more accessible, but I think the why is very important, making sure that everybody understands why they're learning this, how they can apply this in their own life, how it's going to help them get ahead. I think that's our multiple means of engagement that we'll talk about in a little bit, but I think it's very important that we allow our learners to understand, because they have very busy lives. They need to know why this time is important and how it's going to help them. And yes, Libby, what are multiple means of action and expression that they can maybe solve it in a different way instead of just saying, oh no, you have to do it the way that I'm saying.
So we've talked about variability and what it really means to universal design. So the idea that there is no average, there is not an average student, and every student has strengths and weaknesses, right? And we need to build on the strengths that they have and help lift them up through their weaknesses. The other thing that we want to really point out is variability is contextual. So the way you approach a situation is very contextual, and the way in which you're going to engage with students, because they have variability, also the way you engage with them will have variability. So let me walk you through a couple examples here. So the idea that comes from CAST, which is the individuals who wrote the book on UDL, and if you are interested, there's a free resource link in the chat there to a book on universal design. So take advantage of that, open it up, have a great time. It's a PDF. Not right now though, stay with me for a little bit longer. Do that on your lunch, So variability is contextual, and you can approach your situation in 4 different ways. What they like to say is North likes to take action, try new things, plunge in, here we go. That's a North person. An East person likes to look at the big picture and the possibilities before acting. A South person likes to consider everyone's feelings and hear all the voices before we take an action. And in the West, they like to know who, what, when, where, and how before they act. Now I know what you're all are sitting there, you're like, oh, I know my mom is at this, my husband is at this, my sister is at this, my brother. It's not that clean cut. What we want you to understand is with universal design, the way you respond might be different depending on the situation. So for example, at work, I might be a East person. I like to look at the big picture. I like to have the possibilities before acting. Or maybe I'm definitely a West person at work, but I am a North person at home. When planning a party, you might handle things differently than planning a meeting. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's very contextual. You also want to look at how you're engaging with your students. There are students who you can push a little bit more and say, hey, I want you to do this. And be that take action, plunge in, let's go. You're also going to have students who are going to say, wait a second, I need to know the who, what, when, where, and how before I'm ready to start this assignment. I have children who fall into those categories as well. Maybe you know somebody as well. So I want you just to think about that. It really is contextual. We had some, again, all of these different areas that we're talking about, we could do a whole session on. So just let us know and contact us, and we'll be happy to do some additional professional development. But I do want to move now into that idea of variability is the norm. So if we haven't hit that home enough, I want you to understand that if you walk away with nothing else, from this session, I want you to walk away with the idea that variability is the norm. There is no average. Because think about like when Sarah said shoe size. How many of you were like, really? Men's 8.5 is the average shoe size for a male? I mean, those mathematicians in the room were like, of course it is, Amy, because there's some over here and some over here. But average is not what we should be gauging our students on. Variability is the norm. Everyone approaches things uniquely differently. And this really does align so much with our diversity, equity, and inclusion work of allowing us to see the students as who they are and meeting them where they are to help them advance to what they want to be. So moving along here, I probably have a couple of you a little nervous. So variability is the norm. We want you to have variability in your classroom instruction. That's a lot to take on. What am I going to have to do? Okay, you said it's just small changes, but good news, variability is predictable in learning, and we can design for, through universal design, we can design for variability. So allowing options, allowing segments, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. When we look at the brain, and this is where the neurological part happens, and I have to keep moving because apparently my light keeps shutting off in my office, but there is no average brain. The brain is incredibly plastic, and goals drive the neurosystem. There is some phenomenal research on the plasticity of the brain and the way in which women, how they develop, and men, how they develop, can lead to gender, what we have now as gender biases within society. But then there's also a ton of research stating that if you have young people experience different things, so I'm going to give you one example. Have anybody heard of Legos? You know what Legos are? Yes? Legos. So there is a study, and it's been actually thoroughly peer-reviewed, on the fact that if you allow young girls to play with Legos, their math skills will increase and will improve through middle school and high school. Because the spatial reasoning skills that come from playing and designing within the Lego blocks actually enhances spatial reasoning skills, and then they will enhance their math skills. It's phenomenal. So that stereotype that boys are better than math and girls are worse at math is actually, in all stereotypes, there is some truth, but the idea is that we need to move past the what is taught and move into what are those opportunities to look at new things and new approaches. So universal design in the brain, we look at the strategic network, we look at the affective network, and we look at the recognition network, the how, the why, and the what. And we're going to dive into each of these a little bit more deeply, starting with the why. And I believe
The why.
Back over to Sarah.
Hey, and here's the thing, you guys. There is this fabulous handout. Mine,
Yes.
let's see if I can show it.
Nope, it's
I can't see it because there we go. It's one of the handouts we have for you. You can download it from Huba. Mine happens to be laminated because I like to have things laminated that I want to refer to a lot. So the why is that engagement part, the why of learning that some of you mentioned before in the chat. And that's things like recruiting interest. We are much more likely to pay attention and to find a place in our brain where something lives, and we can relate it to something that we already know. And we'd only have an hour, so I'm not going to go too deep on this, but I think that's why some of you in the chat are saying, is this like this? Or is this like this? Or is it this like this? There's some similarities, some differences, because that's what our brain looks for. Our brain looks for connections. That is one of the ways that we learn. So we want to make sure that recruiting interest. We want to make sure that we sustain effort and persistence. If students know, if we know why we're in something, we are much more likely to keep working and to try harder than if it's just like some random assignment. I don't know why I'm doing it and why are they having me do this? So we need to make sure that we are engaging with our students, and we need to make sure this, and you'll see these become, as we go down, it becomes a deeper learning. So we want to make sure that we're interested, that we're going to keep after it, that we're going to sustain it. Then we're also going to self-regulate. We're going to keep going, and we're going to self-monitor. And another time when my teacher's not there and I encounter some type of a problem, because I've learned how to learn, because I know how to regulate myself, I am going to stay with it for a longer time. So the concepts become deeper and more complex as we go down in that rubric column. And the rubric that I held up, some of you couldn't see, here it is. So maybe you can see it a little bit better now. But I encourage you to print this one out, to look at this one, take a look at the resources that Amy showed you. So I want you to think about, we've got the engagement, which is the why, that's the green where we are right now. We're going to talk about representation, action, expression, the what and the how, but also I want you to think about the access layers. In the top layer, when we're recruiting interest, we're creating access. But then as we dig deeper, we're also making learning more meaningful by building learning skills. So again, not just learning the what, but how to learn. Building independence is that really deep level. It's internalizing those learning behaviors and seeing where we're going to apply those in other places. So we want to make sure with our students, we're not only telling them why we're doing this, but like helping them draw that line between this point and that point. Because here's the deal. If we don't draw that line for them, oftentimes learners are not going to draw it for themselves. So they need to see how they're going to take this information and apply it in multiple ways. And that's part of creating access.
So that does bring us to kind of back to the rubric, but that idea of universal design. How are we going to find the barriers in our environment and then remove those barriers? And looking for, it's the opposite of deficit theory. So looking for the issues within the environment and not assuming the issues are within the student. So ways in which we do that through the rubric, if you look at the next slide there, is that access layer. So you're looking at that meaningful engagement layer. What are things that you can do around provide options for language and symbols, provide options for expression and communication, provide options for effort and persistence. Really diving into what we can do through the multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expressions, but how do we allow our students to have those opportunities to be unique, to be varied, to have options that let them shine in the areas that they shine in. And then that also takes us to the idea of accessibility, and that is really how universal design landed in all these laws, is because we're working to increase accessibility and access to our programs. Accessibility as defined by the Department of Education is a person with a disability can acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, enjoy the same services in an equally effective, equally integrated manner with sustainable equivalent ease of use. Sure sounds like removing the barriers to me. So I think that's the lens that we're encouraging you to look through. What are those things in the environment that we can address that will then enhance the student's experience in your classrooms?
Okay, so thank you, Amy, for taking us through that. If I could just add on, because I was late in clicking, so I'm going to take this one because that's how I am. Everyone benefits from accessibility and from infusing UDL in all our lessons. Just as we all benefit from universal design and architecture, I like those buttons that I can push and the door opens for me. A shameless self-story, I became a grandmother earlier this year. So when I'm pushing that baby stroller, I want those cuts in the sidewalk. So it was probably put there for someone with a wheelchair, but I like it too. So we all benefit from universal design architecture, and we all benefit from accessibility and infusing UDL. We all like that font to be changed to a different size, our iPhones, that we can change the lighting on it, all of those kinds of things.
And Sarah, it's baking season, so we all also like the ergonomically designed knives and stirring. I mean, I've got so many apples on my counter at home to make pies and everything with, but my hands will hurt after a while if I don't use the right knife. So all of those things benefit everyone, and that's the same application to the classroom.
For sure. Thanks, Amy. So let's move on to the considering the how, the multiple means of action and expression. If you have that rubric in front of you, it's the blue part. We like to color code things. So that's the physical action. You know, what are we doing to vary methods of how students can show us that they know what we want them to know? Maybe the only way is taking a test. The only way is writing a paper. We're missing some of the people who would be able to engage in a lot of different ways. Multimedia really helps with that as well, to provide multiple ways for expression and communication. If you have ever felt stagnated because somebody wants you to do something in a certain way, and you're like, oh, if they just let me do it, you fill in the blank. That's what we want to create for our students as well, that there's multiple ways. Now, I know there's a couple of adult ed teachers out there going, but Sarah, the standard says we have to do this writing exercise. Here's the thing. Do they have to start there? Could they be given an opportunity to create something in a different way and then eventually address that standard? So I'm not saying the standards are not important. I'm saying let's think about multiple ways that we can allow them to express and communicate. Most of us, when we're doing something hard, we don't want to go like to the top layer immediately. We like to practice. We like to scaffold. We like to have ways to do it that feel good for us before we're asked to do it in a way that's hard for us. And that executive functioning, that frontal lobe, that we're able to problem solve, we're able to goal set, we're able to plan and to monitor. You can see once again, as we go down, it's a deeper learning and deeper meaning. But those are all multiple means of action and expression. So let's think about some things that you can do before we move on. Making sure that you know what your policies and practices are around accessibility and accommodations, especially if you have classes that have moved online. How can you make them more accessible? There's lots of cool features. Some of those features have just come out like in the last 2 months. So if you thought you knew something, we need to constantly be updating and what is available. The closed captioning that you see here in Zoom, a year ago, that wasn't there. It's, what was it, Amy, like 6 months ago or so, they started that it was just available for all so that's something great that showed up for online courses.
And that should be part of the continuous improvement as you're looking at your curriculum. Go back and say what worked, what didn't work. And also be sure that the names of disability services is not called disability services, it's called access and inclusion, or there's all kinds of different naming conventions that have happened over the last 6 months to a year. Be sure that when you're sharing those policies and resources that you have the proper name so students know where to go. Include numbers in your syllabus so they can say, hey, I can pick up the phone and call this person. Here's the website for this. Yes, that lengthens your syllabus. You're talking to somebody who has a 12-page syllabus. I'm okay with that. As long as the information's there and the students can find it, it's a great mechanism to cover that information right as you enter into the class. And then also let them know what accommodations you're willing that you can just allow for without seeing somebody from access and accommodation. So I need to get up, I need to walk around the room. I can't sit for 7 hours. I'm gonna tap my foot, can I sit in the back? I need to fidget. I need to have a snack because I have an issue with my health. Any of those things are things that you don't have to go through some other office for. What are those things that you can take care of? Or one of the other things that's very common right now is, can you share your slides? Can you share your slides because there's a glare either when we're in screen or I process things at a different level. And so you're talking really fast, Dr. Julian, can you share your slides so I can see that information? Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, you did a great job, Amy. Your passion is showing. And you guys, spoiler alert, the next slide is Amy Julian's favorite slide. So I'm gonna bring it up. If you thought she was passionate about this slide, wait until you see the next one. Go, Amy.
This is fantastic. So, if anybody knows me, you know I love acronyms that actually spell words. And yes, I realize I work at ICSPS and that is not a word. And trust me, it's an issue for me daily. But anyway, this is one of my favorite acronyms because one, it spells a word, pour, and two, it is a great way to remember what you want to do when you're pouring over or pouring yourself into your instruction. So you want everyone to be able to see and hear your content. That is so important, whether it be in person or online. Are they able to hear? Do you need a sign language interpreter? Are there things that need to be there to assist your students? And then how can you include alternative text, visual captions, transcripts for videos, all of those fun things. We want your delivery to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And Sarah's had some tech issues today, and we've had other colleagues that have had tech issues. So if your audience is not able to perceive what you're working on, it is not operable. That O is very important. Is everything working the way it's supposed to be working? Is it understandable? Are you speaking too fast? Are you speaking too slow? Is the closed captioning accurate, which we're going to get to in our next slide? And then is the curriculum robust? Are you feeling that everyone is getting what they need out of what you're teaching? I just feel that POUR is a great acronym, so yes, I get very excited. But let's talk about that understandable, and let's talk about alternative text for visual captioning. And Sarah, tell us about how that can go right or how it could go wrong.
Yeah, just as technology can be a beautiful thing and it can go right, sometimes it can go wrong. And sometimes we can have the best of intentions and things don't work the way they should. So one of the other great features is if you upload a video to YouTube, it will automatically close caption. And it gets about 85% of it correct. So here's this nice physics instructor, and we thank him for trying to make his lecture as accessible to his students. So he recorded it and he uploaded it, but there weren't any captions. But then he said, okay, I'm going to put some captions on. But then the auto caption didn't quite get it right. Because if you read there, it says it's trying to make a romaine arrest. So it sounds like we're, arresting a salad or something. Maybe it was a bad salad, and so it's against the law, and we're gonna arrest it. No, it's if you're thinking a physics instructor, it's a body remains at rest. Well, sometimes the auto captions are close, and we can figure them out. Other times they're like way wrong. They have gone down a rabbit hole and they are not coming back. So we need to be careful in all of our attempts with our learners. And that's why I love, we're teaching adults and we can share with them, hey, this is my heart. This is where I am. This is what I want to do. I want to make everything as accessible. And this is why you should ask for things to be accessible. And if I miss the mark sometime, help me out. Let's work together to find ways to make our materials as meaningful as possible. And one of the ways that we do that is our third column, our multiple means of representation, the what. And if we think about that, it's how we perceive things. Again, think about how you like to interact with information and how you like to get that. And as Amy said before, it's contextual. So maybe, and sometimes I might really like to have a conversation. And in other places, I might want to read it for myself. It's how I'm going to interact with it. In other places, I might want a video. It's not always the same. So we think about our language and symbols. We want to, really give a lot of different options for students to interact with information. And again, you can see it going more deeply as we get down to that comprehension. Think about whenever you hear a new concept, maybe it's UDL, and you learn it on a very basic level. And then as you interact with it more and think about it more and have more discussions, then you can comprehend it on a deeper level. And because of that, we're going to, again, I know we're getting close to time, but let's pause and reflect just for a minute and see if anybody has any questions, or if you want to put in, what could you add to infuse UDL in your classroom? We'll do that for just a minute. You know what, and that's interesting. We said that sometimes people are resistant to go and ask for services. I think that's one of the great things about UDL. If we design for everybody, then we're much more likely to have that person who may have a disability that they're not necessarily wanting to disclose. They may be able to thrive in your classroom, where if you hadn't had that designing for variability, you might not be able to.
I love Kathy's suggestion, ask for ideas from the students. One of the things that I have done since I fell in love with universal design is at the beginning of the class, and I did this before, I just wasn't as intentional about it. I asked my students, what do you want to get out of this class? What are you working on? What's your goal? How will if I am going to meet your expectations, I need to understand what your expectations are. And really having them give you ideas, having them have buy-in and ownership in what they're learning is so exciting and important.
All right, so you guys
we need to shift to the Padlet, or we're gonna.
Yeah, okay, so I will. Okay, maybe some of you have seen Padlet before, but it's a great little tool that you can post notes to a common page. So what we're going to do at this point is, because we're finishing up, we're going to have our exit ticket for this session. One great idea you will use to infuse UDL, and don't make this hard, you guys. Think of one thing that you're going to do, and Amy's going to put the link to the Padlet in the chat. So if you want to, you can just put this in the chat. If you'd like to go to the Padlet, I'd love for you to do that, because then you can see what everybody else does, and we can leave it there and you can read it later. And if you need a little more motivation, if you put an idea in the Padlet and with your name, and let me know who you are, then I will send you a reward of a laminated rubric. Yeah. Okay. Now
it's serious.
Now we've recruited interest. That's how recruiting interest is sometimes known as bribery, but I feel like that's kind of harsh. So yes, put something in there, then we'll do that. And while you're doing that, Amy, you want to tell us a little bit about some resources?
So while you're engaging with that Padlet, just continue to listen to us for a second more. We have some resources. Again, these are on your forum handouts right on the Whova app. Excellence in Adult Education UDL video, so I already threw that in the chat a couple times. A video about universal design implementation at Mcgill University, and the reason I share this is because it is an entire university that said, we're going to embrace universal design. So you see it from the admission standpoint, you see it from the student service standpoint, you see it from the student standpoint, and you see it from the faculty standpoint. It's a phenomenal video. If you have a minute, watch that. I know Tiger King 2 is coming out, but don't do this instead. It'll be a better use of your time. Free UDL resources, that is CAST. Again, they are the individuals who really wrote the book on universal design. We've shared that, one of those resources. They have tons of resources. And then this last is a phenomenal article. I know you're saying 2006, Amy, that's 15 years ago. Yes. However, Universal Design in Post-Secondary Education, Reflecting on the Principles and Application, great resource, still very relevant, so we want to make you aware of that. We're going to close out with a couple thoughts here. Want you to remember, universal design is not a checklist. You need to infuse UDL based on your goals. Teach students how to learn, not just what to learn, and that is so important. How do they go about engaging with the material? How do they learn, not just what to learn? Universal design varies in every context. Small changes will make a big difference. We've given you a lot of things that you can implement tomorrow. And so I encourage you to do so, really looking at the world through that lens of universal design. And then that is our contact information. Again, send us an email. We'd love to do additional sessions for you. If you have questions, if you have application questions, let us know. And I believe there's an Equity and Diversity Institute that you're hosting, Sarah. Do you want to do a little plug for that before I talk about the awesome conference chicken we have for lunch today?
Absolutely. In adult education, we have the Foundations of Designing for Equity and Access for All Learners, and that has some UDL infused in it. And then we also have the Equity Institute, which is Equity in Action using UDL in your classroom. So both of those, send me an email. At this point is probably the easiest thing to do. If you'd like to be a part of that or get more information, then you want to take us home here, Amy?
Please go out and rate our session. You're going to have evaluation in two different ways. One is through the Whova app, where you can rate the session, and then you'll also get a link to a Survey Monkey at the close of the forum, and then also later in the day around evaluating what you thought of the conference. So please let us know, because we are always working towards continuous improvement. In addition to that, we have social media. So if you haven't been, please start engaging with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then the hashtags for this conference, one bad second, is hashtag Forum for Excellence 2021 and Excellence for Equity. And then check out our exhibitors. There's some fantastic resources in our exhibitor area there, and we talked about that yesterday.
One other thing I'm going to add, Amy, is we got a notice from our team, from our great conference planning team, that we're supposed to ask you guys to go like pictures in the picture gallery to vote on who wins. So you guys have the power to go pick the winner. So that's, I believe, all that we have.
It is really quickly. We're going to come back at our next session. We'll be starting at noon.
Yep, 12 o'clock.
12 o'clock. So we have 12 to 1. So you have a half-hour lunch break. There's some fantastic conference chicken somewhere. You guys don't have to eat that. You get to eat whatever you have in your office or what's at home with you. So enjoy your lunch and join us back at 12. Thank you so much.
It's your choice. It's your choice, whatever you have.
Total variability today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.